I one day decided that I was going to keep some notes for my kids and maybe make a little pamphlet just to tell them what I'd done in my lifetime, because they probably don't know, probably still don't know. And so with that in mind, I started making a few notes, and that grew until, I suppose I spent a year doing that sort of thing. And then I started putting it together, putting things in their proper places. So if it seems a little disjointed, that's why. Well, I lived in Northwood, North Dakota, in the far east of North Dakota, in the Red River Valley, which is an old lake bed. Actually, it's Lake Agassiz. My dad was a grocery man.
And your mother?
My mother was a mother.
A mother?
Yep.
How many brothers and sisters?
I had no brothers, 3 sisters.
Tell us a little bit about what you remember of North Dakota, where you lived.
Very, very flat. They had a penitentiary, not at that particular place, but in North Dakota they had a penitentiary, and they never had a guard at the penitentiary. They just had a guy who sat there and watched and to see if anybody tried to escape. And when they did, he let them walk until they went out of sight outside the what do you call it? The curve of the earth. When they disappeared outside the curve of the earth, then they'd send somebody out to bring him back. Of course, they didn't really do that, but they could have. And that's where I was raised until I was born in '33, and then moved to western Montana in '58, I think it was.
So you moved to Montana, how old were you?
I was, I think, 14, I think I was. I was living in the Bitterroot Valley. It was a north-south valley. The Bitterroot River ran from south to north, where it joined a bigger river. And eventually, those waters joined with all the other waters to dump into the Columbia River and eventually go out in the Pacific. Living in Montana was probably the best thing that I ever did in my whole life. To be able to get away from the farming, not that farming is bad, but the farming feeling about this place and the flat land, and go out to a place that I instantly was seeing mountains and fast-running rivers with creeks, I should say, with trout in every one of them. Always something to do, always something to fish, to hunt. Hunting elk was a big deal for me, and my dad bought a .348 Winchester rifle that I still own, and that rifle has served me very well over the years. I think I've killed 14 elk or something like that, plus other critters as well, but mostly elk.
Sounds like life in Montana really appealed to you.
Saved my life, probably.
At some point you decided to join the service, the Air Force. What were you doing prior to that?
Going to school, Montana State University, which is now the University of Montana. They've changed that around a little bit. I don't think they've got any difference really. But that was in Missoula. And let's see. Well, I lived in Hamilton, Montana, which was 50 miles south of Missoula. So that was the most likely place to go to school after I left high school. Of graduated from high school in '51, went to the University of Montana, majored in music, and mostly because I didn't know what I could do otherwise. I intended to be a music teacher, which I never did. But I did go up there and go to university, yeah.
I think it was after you graduated high school that you went and worked as a firefighter and to build the fire lookout tower at Bear Mountain?
That's true.
What was that experience like?
Wonderful. It was about a 6,500 foot mountain, and right alongside the Loxaw River, but way, 5,000 feet above it. No one else to bother you. You lived and died by what you did. That was all. And well, I was in trail crew to begin with, and when the trail crew got myself and another guy who was as dumb as I was, which is pretty dumb, and the two of us, and we had a guy named Frank Gummer who was our boss, and a strict taskmaster indeed. And so when we had cleared the trail and the telephone lines all the way up to the mountain, which was about 6 miles, I was put to work with a guy, 75-year-old guy, who evidently he had an alcohol problem because they wouldn't let him come off the lookout until the lookout was completed. And because the year before, they had torn down the old lookout, which was a splay-legged tower made of dead trees and with a cabin on the top of it. And then it was our job, the three of us, to build a new tower, about 10 by 10 foot straight tower anyway. It didn't have any splay to it at all. Straight tower, 4 legs, and about every 12 feet or something like that, they had a bunch of creosoted timbers that went across, and that steadied everything. And then once we were there, then we moved to that higher point, and we started building another 12 feet up from there, and we ended up going 51 feet and 4 inches, as I recall, to the deck of the tower, and we finished it that year. I didn't know anything about hammering a nail or sawing a board, but the boards were all there. We didn't saw anything, and we just put the things together that they said that our boss said to put. So that's what we did that whole summer.
So you write about, I think when you were age 61, that you went back to that same fire lookout tower?
I did that.
That's pretty incredible. How was that going back?
I'm getting teary-eyed with that because that was really wonderful. It was exactly as it had been, although I had left a note. When I left there, I left a note for the guy who came in after me and was going to come in for that next year. And I left a note for him, and I said, the flooring, I've put the flooring in, and it is in perfect condition. It was as good as I can possibly make it, and I don't want anybody walking with corked shoes. And for those who don't know what a corked shoe is, it's spelled C-A-U-L-K, but everybody pronounces cork, C-O-R-K. And what it is they got spikes in the bottom of your boots. And if you walk on that, you put these spike holes all over in it. Well, when I finally got back, after I went back a second time, somebody had walked in spikes. I was not very happy about that. But that's the way it was. And I had a good time. At that point, I had to correct all that had happened. I know I painted the place when I first was there, and it needed painting again. And I don't think that it had been painted in that whole time, and I don't know how long that was, 10 years or something like that. So it was in bad shape. The what do you call them? The shutters. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 shutters. They were about 4 feet, I suppose 4 feet high, and then probably 6 feet long. And there were 2 of them on each side of the tower. So I sort of stood on the flooring, the decking up there, and took those things down, which was a terrible job because they were very unwieldy. And for part of that time, I had another guy who came up from another lookout who helped me with it. And that was life-saving, maybe. Because at one point I did lose a grip on that big sheet of wood. I don't know what that thing weighed, 150 pounds probably, and it's long and unwieldy, and it threatened to fly off the very side of the thing with me attached to it, I suppose. I'm being overly dramatic, but that's the way it felt to me.
How did you decide to write this book? Is it something you've been planning to do for a while?
I somehow or another decided that I should write something so that my kids would know what I had done in my time period, because I knew that they didn't know. So I started writing just short notes to myself, and that's where this all came from.
How long did it take you to write this book?
Well, if you consider the writing of it to just be the writing of it, probably about a year. All of the preliminaries to writing the book were to get those smaller things together in some sort of order so that it would make some sort of sense to somebody who was going to read the book.
So I have a question from a fellow musician friend, Bob Smith. He asks, your book is not in strict chronological order. Instead, you were recalling your favorite experiences, or maybe you've arranged these events in order of the most importance to you. He asks because you didn't write much about your years as a commercial pilot, which must have been interesting in itself, but spent a lot of time on the people most important to you.
Yeah, I don't know whether I really spent a lot of time on the people. I guess I spent the time on those things I thought were important, and they probably did include people. Everybody thinks that a commercial pilot is really exciting and that sort of thing. Being a fighter pilot, now that's another topic. That is exciting. But being a commercial pilot is just mostly deadly boring. Maybe I shouldn't use deadly in there, but.
So outside of being a commercial pilot, you do write about some pretty harrowing flying experiences. Do you have a favorite flying story that you could share?
A favorite, huh? Well, yeah, I can. There's one that's in the book. I was flying fighter up in Alaska, and I got a phone call, and I don't know why I always seem to get these phone calls. Maybe because I said, yes, I will do that. But I enjoyed that sort of thing. So it was 10, 11 o'clock at night when they called me up and they said, we've got an airplane ready to take down to King Salmon, Alaska, which was another base that we flew out of in Alaska, in the southwest corner. And they said, do you want to take this flight? And I said, sure, I will. Because I like those things, because you're by yourself. You don't have to do what anybody else says to do. You just got to get the airplane to where they want it and then fly a different airplane back. Well, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning by the time I got out to the airport, and I pre-flighted the airplane. Everything seemed just fine, and I started it up and taxied out to the end of the runway and told them I was ready to go. And they said, go ahead and take off. Not in those words, but yes. So I took off. The afterburner was lit, which produces a sheet of flame about 40 or 50 feet long out the back end of the airplane. And I intended to leave the afterburner on for quite a long time to burn off fuel so that I would have not too much fuel when I got to King Salmon, because it's a rather short runway and you would rather have a low weight. You get it stopped faster. So I took off. There was a light overcast. I couldn't see the stars or anything like this, and I had about 300 knots, 400 miles an hour roughly, as a good starting point for flying. And that took me on a very steep climb attitude. And I punched into that little bitty cloud cover that was out there, and I was surprised because suddenly, I wasn't in that cloud cover for more than 3 or 4 seconds, it seems like. And I broke out on top of that, and there were aurora borealis from one end to the other, as far out in front of me, to the right side, to the left side, up above me. I called up the ground control people, and I told them what I was seeing with all of this. And I said, I want to climb this thing as high as I possibly can, as high as this airplane will go, which is going to be roughly 55,000 feet. So they said, go right ahead. And I said, I'm going to be off the air because I'm going to take my helmet off. And they said, great, call us when you get through. So I did that, and the aurora borealis were just spectacular. I've never seen anything like them before in my life. On the other hand, some people have seen auroras that are red, pink, kind of even a bluish color. I have never seen anything except that one that you see most often, which is a kind of a yellowish, a brilliant yellowish color. And that's what these were. And so I climbed up, and that's the way I flew most of the way down to King Salmon. And when I got ready to descend, I called them, I put my helmet back on and called them up and said I was ready to descend, and descended then and landed at King Salmon, exchanged an airplane, and then flew that other airplane back to Anchorage.
Can you tell us what kind of an airplane that was?
Oh yeah, that was an F-102. It's a single place. They did have a twin place airplane, a two place airplane. That we did have, but it had a wider cockpit, and 2 pilots sat side by side so that you could teach in that one. The squadron only had one of those. Of the regular 102A, I don't know how many we had, probably 30 or 40 airplanes.
This would have been the late 1950s, early 1960s?
I would say yes, mid 1950s, mid.
It seems like there's something for everyone in your book. I found a lot of connections to my family in your
Really?
adventures. I did. So it makes me wonder, when you were writing the book, how much were you thinking about the reader? Were you just thinking about your family and your children reading it, or were you thinking about a wider audience who might sometimes?
I initially thought about my kids. That was who this thing was supposed to be for. And that pretty rapidly got changed to being for just about anybody who might be interested in it, because I finally realized that nobody, I say nobody, but very few people have ever been on a lookout, much less been up there for more than a year, more than a summer, I should say. It's not a whole year.
So moving on, one of your biggest connections to the Gorge seems to be music. So you were the director of Gorge Winds, and you played in the Sinfonietta and had other bands. What are some of your fondest memories with those groups, or about music in general in the Gorge?
I think it's more musical in general, because if you play with a bunch of musicians, you get to know them and know how they play and play in concert with them, if I may say it that way. And that's what makes it special, because I can't do what they can do. They can't do what I can do. And if we put the two of them together, then we can both, if you put 60 people, the band that I had, Gorge Winds Concert Band, at one time had 62 members. It didn't last more than about a year having that many people, but we had a lot of people. And all of them contribute, all of them make a big, big help on making music what it is great.
Did you have a favorite kind of music to play? The concert band music or jazz band music or
No, I don't. It makes no real difference to me. I just call it good music. If you're going to call it rock and roll, that ain't good music. But for me, concert band, orchestra, classical music, jazz music, all of it, wonderful.
What else do you see as your connection to the Gorge? What do you love most about living here, since you've lived in a lot of amazing places?
I suppose that's true. I like the Gorge because, well, I live, if you will, on the Gorge, about 400 feet over the top of the Gorge on the Washington side. And the view that I have is just spectacular.
You write about some major events that you witnessed, like the earthquake in Alaska and living through 9/11. One more recent major event, of course, is the pandemic that we're all still living through. If you're writing your book now, or a few years from now, what do you think you'd write about your experience of living through this pandemic?
Pandemic is an odd thing. I don't consider it even worth writing about, quite frankly. The people who live here and don't do the things that they should be doing to keep themselves safe and to keep their friends and their relatives and their neighbors safe from this pandemic are going to pay the price, and the price is not going to be pleasant. Really, I would rather not even write about it. Everybody is their own master. You make your own bed, you're going to have to sleep in it. So that's what I think about that.
What are one or a few of your happiest memories of your lifetime? If you think back, like, that was the best moment, or there you any
You
of those
know,
moments?
you gave me a list of these things, and the happiest moments, that's a really hard one. I don't really know. If you said the hunting times were, going out and getting elk, I don't think during the time that I was young there that my family ever went without elk meat. Did I say earlier that I think I had 14 elk to my credit?
Yeah. Memories.
I think the hunting, the fishing, all of this is in Montana and Idaho.
Yeah.
Idaho was where I was on the lookout. And all of those times are very, very nice, very wonderful times. Contrasted with eastern North Dakota, boy, I died and gone to heaven.
What about your time in Alaska? I'm sure the earthquake was a big moment then, but do you have other fond memories?
That is undoubtedly the most consequential thing that I've ever endured in my lifetime. That was a 9.4 or something like that earthquake. If you are having a 9.0 is 10 times as big as an 8.0, and then an 8.0 is 9. It's 10 times as big as a 7.0, and so on. So when the earthquake hit, I was at home in Elmendorf Air Force Base, and had a 2-bedroom house, and I was next door at my next door neighbors who had a piano, because we were going to have a party, a squadron party, and what I was going to do was to make up a bottle band. That's a band where you take all these bottles, same size bottles, and you fill them with different amounts of water, and you blow over, and it makes a tone. And you can make all the tones you want to, and people, you will play on one of these things, I'll play on one of them, you play on 2 of them, you play on 3 of them maybe even, and you make music with that. And I was sitting on, because my neighbor had a piano, I didn't, and I was writing down the notes that had to be there. And I was sitting on the piano bench. He was just behind me watching what I was doing, which looked like magic to him, I'm sure. And so I was sitting there pounding out these notes, and all of a sudden there was this little wiggle that started, and it went within 2 or 3 seconds to full blown. And I'd never been in an earthquake, so I didn't know what it was, really. I did in a way. I jumped up from the piano bench, I ran through the rest of his house. I ran by his what do you call it, a crystal, where all this crystal was stored. It had a display case. It was about 6 feet tall, and with two glass doors on it, about that wide. And both of those doors, before I got there, both of those doors were in the process of popping open. And he's got all this crystal and stuff on the inside, he and his wife. And I stopped very quickly. I took those things and I slammed them shut. And they never lost a thing. It was just fine. I ran out the back door and I ran over to my next door, to my place. And I remember going across, there was some snow on the ground, but mostly it was just frozen. And the ground was moving back and forth about that far, about 12, 14 inches at this rate. So as I ran, you don't realize it, but when you run, you or when you walk. You pick a place for your foot to land. Well, as I ran across there, I had a place picked for my foot, but it moved away, so I landed on something else. But it seems to me that I went very straight getting over there. And when I walked in the back door, everything was a shambles, just a mess. But it stopped in, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes, something like that. Doesn't last very long. My daughter, I found my daughter, I don't know where the other 2 kids were, but I found my daughter outside in the front of the house where there was a green cast iron pole that had lights on the top of them. And she had a death grip on that blasted pole.
Was your house badly damaged?
Most everything inside the house was damaged, although the TV fell over and fell on the floor, and plugged it in and turned it on. It worked fine. Although they were, at that point, they were saying, we are now operating under emergency regulations, and said that we had an earthquake, and here's what's going to happen from now on. So from then on, for I don't know how many days, all they talked about over that thing was emergency regulations, and what else about the emergency regulations? Well, you just had to obey all the rules and that sort of thing. And would Dr. So-and-so please come to the hospital? He lost 2 kids.
The doctor did.
Yeah, they were in the basement, and the basement collapsed on them. Those kinds of things, lots and lots of those kinds of things. The editor of the paper in town was at his house, and he was playing on his brand new trumpet. He'd just gotten a brand new trumpet, and the house collapsed underneath him, and he fell down into the sand and gravel underneath there. And he still had hold of his trumpet, and it was underneath there, and he pulled it up, and he still had a trumpet. So he saved his trumpet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for people who want to record memories like you did from your life, or if they want to record or write memories of their loved ones? What advice do you have about how to do that?
First of all, you decide, do it. That's as plain and simple as it gets. Just do it. It doesn't make any difference how fast or how slow you do it. It does mean that you should take notes. Write little notes to yourself. Get a special notebook and start writing little notes. Leave room for more stuff underneath each one. Maybe 2 subjects to a page or something like this. And then when you get a bunch of those things, and you start to write down about theirs, there are more of them that will show up, and so you go ahead and do those. And that's the way I went. And it took a lot of editing after the fact, because misspelled words and making small what do you call them?
Edits, changes.
Credits, yeah,
Edits.
that sort of thing, yeah. So it does take some doing to write the book, but it doesn't have to be done in any time. You can take as much time as you want, and it can be as extensive as you want, and let people read it if they want to. That's good.
Did you ever wish your parents wrote down more about their lives?
I never had a chance, so I don't think that that they would have done that. They were so busy in the grocery store was a farmer's mercantile. So busy with that sort of thing. I remember my dad one time was so terribly proud. He stopped me and he said, do you know how much money we took in yesterday? And I expected some fantastic. He said, we took in $32. $32. So,
Hardworking.
Yeah. They didn't have time to do any writing or anything like that, no.
Well, it's neat in your book that you start off writing about your grandmother, right, Brita, who came from Norway. That was a really neat thing to read about, your ancestors.
Yeah, I worried about that being something that nobody would be interested in. But I guess some people are interested in it. And her story is pretty significant, and considering doing this kind of thing today, nobody would dare. But she was, I think, 16 years old, and she went to her dad and she said, I want to go to America. And he said, well, he didn't say no way, but he told her in no uncertain terms, no, she wasn't going to. She was living in Norway, and that's where she was going to stay. And she kept badgering him, and he finally got in touch with a brother that he had who lived in Northwood, North Dakota. And now, who the devil even knows where Northwood, North Dakota is? Nobody does. So she decided, she badgered him enough, and he talked to his brother in North Dakota, and she was sent, I can't remember now what it was, but it seems to me a $20 bill. It might have been less than that. I don't think it was more than that. And with that, she left Norway and went someplace else, and she got on another boat, and one of those two boats was named the Hekla. And I'm told now, I didn't know it at the time, but I'm told now that it was a brand new boat at that time. And she got on the Hekla, and she ended up in New York City. She had a friend of hers back in Norway who had done that same thing. And when she had gotten to New York, she had been kidnapped. And whatever had happened to her had broken her mind entirely. And when the police finally found her, they shipped her back to Norway because she was absolutely broken. And so my grandmother worried about that. So she wouldn't talk to anybody. And she managed to get as far as, what's the name of it? Larimore, North Dakota. And there she got off the train, and she had a wooden case with her with all of her food, and there still was food that she could eat in there. Her pair of shoes, maybe, whatever she had, was all in this little case. And she walked through Larimore, and it's in the book, as a matter of fact. So she walked through Larimore with this, and a fat guy who was sitting along the side called out to her and asked her what she was looking for. And she didn't speak English. He spoke English to her. So she didn't know what to say. And he finally figured out that she's Norwegian. He spoke Norwegian. And so he did the translation. And there was a young guy with a young girl, and they were going down from Larimore to Northwood, which is about 13 miles. And if she would leave her case there, he would get in touch with this guy, and they would then go down to, she would be able to go there, and she did. They did, and she did. And when they got there, she took that little case and she started walking west, going someplace. And somebody called from a porch and asked. And there she had to say who she was looking for. They lived just down the road a ways. And the first thing they did then was the 2 or 3 different women got materials enough, and they made her a couple of dresses so that she would be able to go someplace and get a job and that sort of thing. And that's my grandmother's story coming to the United States.
Very adventurous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you definitely got a lot of that from her. So your book has been described as a captivating autobiography about an ordinary man who witnesses extraordinary events. I think a lot of us don't see you as ordinary because of all the things you've done and the adventures you have embraced. What would you say to someone who argues that you are extraordinary?
I can see where people would say that I've done extraordinary things. I don't think that I'm extraordinary. No, absolutely not. I'm just an ordinary bloke who happened to be in a position to do all of these things. You know, I know guys who, principally pilots. I'm going to talk about one guy that I know, and there are lots of them. But this one guy said, I always knew what I wanted to do. From my earliest days, I knew I wanted to be a pilot. And my answer to that is that I never knew what I wanted to do. I've made it very plain when I say I would just kind of hold my arms out like this and say, hit me if you can find an opening. And what happened was I was allowed, was in a position where I could do certain things, and I was allowed to do them, and so I did, and I did reasonably well at those things, and so there wasn't any of my doing. I didn't select that stuff. It selected me.
You write at the end of your book, I had only to agree to do what was in front of my nose.
That's exactly what I just said.
But I think not everyone
Differently.
can do that. So how do you have that spirit? You think you came with that spirit to just grab it and do it?
Yeah, you don't have a choice. You know, they tell you to ride to walk to the top of that hill and jump and go on that lookout. That's what you got to do. If you don't do that, you fire you, send you back to Missoula.
So aging is a part of life and perhaps an adventure in itself. What are your thoughts on getting older, and what advice do you have for younger people?
Do the things, as a young person, do the things that are put in front of your nose. And do them as well as you can. And you're going to find out that you know that you can do those kinds of things.
Is there anything else we haven't talked about? Anything else you want to
Oh,
tell
we've
us
talked
about
about
you or about the book? Anything else?
We've talked about way too much already.
We got it all.
I don't know what else to say. I've made a fool of myself anyway.
Not at
So.
all. Thank you so much for sharing your stories.
Yeah, you're
So
welcome.
neat to hear about.
Thank you for wanting to have it. It's really something.